What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Stacia Nelson of Pivot Strategies. And Stacia, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. And since Stacia is an amazing agency owner, I've had some other great people on. Andy Crestodina, who's a master at websites. Check him out. Also, I had Todd Taskey on. He talks about, he pairs agencies with private equity and helps them sell. And he has a Second Bite podcast. So sometimes the owners make more on the second bite than the first. So check those out and much more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do strategy, accountability, and execution. And, you know, for me, Stacia, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire, profile them, and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com to learn more. And I'm excited. We have Stacia Nelson, founded Pivot Strategies. You can find them at pivotstrategies.com. And after losing her corporate job in a mass layoff, Pivot Strategies is an internal communications firm that she started. And now it has over 40 employees. It's an Inc. 5000 company in 2022. And we're going to dig into one thing, Stacia, that I'm particularly interested in, which is it was made best places to work in Minneapolis. And she also was in Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Heartland finalist and received numerous awards, Women in Tech. The most impressive thing is not all of that, Stacia, but it is raising 3 kids while doing all of that. I mean, each kid is a full-time job, let alone 3 kids and a business. Stacia, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Talk about that for a second. Raising 3 kids with a business. I don't know how my wife does it, to be honest with you. I mean, I help, but like compared to her, I do nothing. 2 kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I started Pivot, my oldest now was only 11 months old. So I started with only 1 kid. So the biggest challenge has been having 2 and then having 2 maternity leaves during the last 7 years.
How'd you manage that maternity leave with the business?
You know, I think you've got to turn kind of like your greatest weakness into your greatest strength. So I had to get really good at delegation, really good at trusting other people, really good at hiring the right talent that I knew I could, who could run the ship while I was out. And that actually became a huge part of how we grew, because my first maternity leave I took with my son, my second, while I was out, I put a team in place to kind of manage 1 client. And at the time we lacked diversity. We were pretty focused on 1 client. But when I came back, because things were going well and the employees were doing a really great job of managing that account, I was able to actually start to diversify the business. So it was hard at the time, but it ended up being the best thing that could have happened for the company.
Yeah. There's some book in you. I don't know what it is. It's not called maternity leave, but like, you know, people talk about sabbaticals, but maternity leave is hardcore because it's not a sabbatical. You come back, you still have a kid at home. Like you're not coming back with nothing. So who are the key hires you put in place leading up to maternity leave? And you had a couple of these maternity leaves. So who were some of those key hires?
Yeah, I did. So when I first went out, I wasn't quite at the place. I think I had about 8 employees. So I wasn't really at the point of hiring a leadership team. So at that time, I just had some really great consultants on my team. A couple of them are still with us. So Kate Kenevan is one on our team who is just a rock star, and she helped significantly with one of our big clients at that time. And then actually Tom Hesse, who did basically operations, and he's still with us too. They both just celebrated their 5-year anniversaries. And they kind of kept things going from the client perspective, but also the operation side. And then my second maternity leave, at that point, we were quite a bit bigger. I think we had probably around 24, 25 employees. And that's when I had started to create a leadership team. So I'd already hired two really great leaders, and I decided we're an EOS company. So I hired an integrator, which is basically a head of operations.
I've had Gino Wickman on the podcast before.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a huge EOS fan. So we brought in an integrator, and that was really our first go at having an integrator.
How did you find them?
I ended up using a search firm. It did not work out for us, that integrator. What I realized, and I think I'm just very fortunate this happened, but I had my integrator already hired, and she just wasn't quite ready yet. But now she is. And actually, we just announced about a month ago, Stephanie Jorgensen, she is our new president. And so she's really serving in that role as integrator now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
When, a company is growing, talk about the leadership team, because sometimes people hire when they're at a pain point, they're like, we need to hire it. And sometimes it's a stretch at the time. What was your situation like?
So the first leader I hired, Becca Biak, who's still with us as well. I hired her when it was a stretch. So I didn't really have the budget. And what I loved about Becca at the time, she just was able to come in and provide leadership skills, yet also execute and be billable. So she kind of paid for herself, which I was very appreciative of, because I couldn't really afford to take this big leap.
She was like a player coach situation.
Exactly. Player coach is a great way. Yeah. She was like just a communications athlete, right? She was so good at so many things and had this willingness to really jump into anything. And whether it was figuring out a hard problem or handling a client, she was able to do both and walk away with, A+ reviews from anything. So she was my first hire.
What was her position, like leadership position?
She was marketing and kind of growth, business development. But because she was the only leader, she ended up taking on, she was doing sales ops. She was doing new hiring in some cases for some of the marketing and sales needs. So she was kind of doing a variety of things. I would call her she was my right-hand person, essentially.
Awesome. Yeah. So that was a stretch. What about the next?
The next one was Steph Jorgensen, and she's the one who's the president today. She was actually more of an investment decision. So we were in a good place financially. I saw a lot of potential in her. She came from a corporate role. She was actually working for Medtronic, who at the time was also someone we were working with. And so it's a little tricky, but I think she was ready for a different opportunity to really spread her wings. And her passion was managing teams, growing teams, coaching people. And that's exactly what I needed to kind of get myself out of and have someone else replace me on. And once I brought her in, she was maybe a little bit billable, but mostly not. And the team just soared immediately within probably 3 months of hiring her. It was a game changer.
When you have a new person in position like that, how do you structure the position or train, or do you just let them do what they do?
I'm a classic visionary. My team would laugh if they heard this, because I try to take those steps, and we're hiring a sales role. So we have this 90-day plan for a salesperson, but with Becca and with Steph, God bless them, because I just was like, here, just figure it out. Google, if they'd have questions, if I knew the answer, I would say, here's how I've done it in the past. That's usually how I would explain things. But otherwise I would say, Google it, figure it out, come up with something new. And it's not just, I think that I'm kind of, more of that visionary type of personality. It's also, I never worked for an agency before. So I don't really know how agencies typically run, and I don't necessarily want to know how they run. I want to do things different and have it be a, different kind of place than others. So I don't want to just recreate the wheel in terms of what's been done before.
Yeah. Stacia, I want to dig in a little bit to, I mentioned that there was a mass layoff. You lost your position, and instead of going back into corporate, you started your own. So I'm wondering why. And before we get to that, I just want to point out, we're mentioning Visionary Integrator. There's a great book, Traction by Gino Wickman. There's also a great book, Rocket Fuel by Mark Winters and Gino Wickman. And I had Mark on the podcast, so you could check that episode out. And I think they also have a quiz on, I'm not sure where it is at this point, if it's on Rocket Fuel, but to see what percentage you are a visionary integrator. I took it at one point. So it's somewhere on the internet so you can find it. But there's a mass layoff. You decide to start your own as opposed to go back into corporate.
Yeah. So it was 2015. My March of 2015, my daughter was 11 months old. I only had one child at that time. And my husband, Dan, had been in communications, and he wasn't really loving his job. And I loved my job. So I was like, you need to be in a career that you enjoy. And he decided, well, maybe I'll go back to school. He had just had a major knee injury. And so he was really interested in kind of the nursing, doctor, PA kind of route in terms of supporting and helping other people, getting out behind a desk. So I said, go do that. And so he quit his job, and he was actually just taking classes to see if he was still, if he was good at math and science, because he had been a political science major in college. So it's been years and years since he's been in school. And I didn't really have a big heads up that any layoffs were coming. Target was, wasn't, I think still is very much like the sweetheart of the Twin Cities, great employer, great culture. And I'd had a great experience. And so I didn't really see this coming. I came into to work one day, and they laid off, I think it was 2,000 people in one day. It was like 20% of their
Holy cow.
And so, it was big in the news, especially here locally. There was a kind of a lot of hubbub with it, because like the governor didn't know what was happening. All these people were suddenly displaced and unemployed. Anyways, I have this 11-month-old baby. My son, my husband isn't working, and I was supposed to be kind of, doing one for the team and keeping the corporate job. And then all of a sudden I didn't have that. So I was fortunate. I had 4 months severance. So that was great that I had something to go off of. But at that time, I really didn't think I would be able to find a job at my level, like a manager level, which actually wasn't a very high up role. I mean, I was not in a big role. I was in kind of middle management role at Target, even lower management role, I would say. I would manage teams, but those teams wouldn't manage teams, if that makes sense. So I needed to find a job, and I knew that I would need some time to do that. And I had just been recruited by another company, actually Starbucks, and I ended up being the finalist, and I ended up turning it down because we decided to have a baby and not move away from family. But that, even with being recruited, that took me 9 months to get to a final offer. So that just gives you an idea of what the economy and the job market looked like at that time. So I knew to proactively look for a job, it was probably going to be closer to 9 to 12 months. And with only kind of a four month runway, I had some friends that reached out to me that I had worked with at Target. They had gone, the nice thing about working at a company like Target is the people go on to great companies. Probably some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And so I had a few that reached out and said, hey, I heard about the layoffs. Were you impacted? I said, yes. And they said, I'm really sorry to hear that. How can I help? We connected. And in the course of those conversations, I learned that they had some communications projects. And they said, would you want to consult on it? It's very similar to some of the work we did before. I know you can do it. I'd be happy to give it the work to you. And I talked to my husband about it, and I thought, I don't want to do consulting. I had this misnomer about consulting. I thought it was something you do in between jobs or when you're at the end of your career. I didn't realize how rewarding it could be. So I was not going to do it. My husband convinced me to do it mainly because it would just buy us some time, and I could be more picky about the job that I would then end up in. We were really hoping to stay in the Twin Cities, given our young family. And so I needed some extra time. So I took the roles, my first 3 clients, and now I say this like I'm so grateful now that I did this, but my first 3 clients were Nike, American Express, and Cargill. So not a bad way to start, right? And I actually loved it. I loved the work. And more importantly, they seemed really happy. And so I was getting this really positive reinforcement. I kind of re-fell in love with communications. I was learning new things because I was in new companies, but I was applying so much of what I'd learned in my corporate experience. And it just kind of took off from there. We ended up really I found this niche around. There's not a lot of people who go from corporate to consulting. A lot of people do the opposite. It's like, you come out of school and you go into an agency, and then when you've really made it, you go into a corporate role, and then you climb the ladder in the corporate role and you jump into different corporations, and that's kind of the path. So having not come from an agency, I didn't really realize that there was this lack of people with corporate experience who knew how to navigate bureaucracy, who knew how to manage global organization changes, and so many people that you have to communicate with. It's not like a pickup game. It's something that you definitely learn from experience how to do well.
Stacia, that is really an amazing piece of the journey. I'm curious, when the company, your friends bring you in, and you're working with these amazing companies, how do you decide how to charge, right? You were in a corporate position. You probably didn't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. Sometimes people say, I have imposter syndrome. I've never really done this. I've done this in this other position, but I've never done this on my own. How do I charge? Was there any of those thoughts going through your head as far as how should I charge for this?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because I think a lot of people actually ask me that when they're starting out. I actually just talked to a woman yesterday who's going to start her own company, and I was explaining how I did it. So I took my corporate salary and I divided it. I basically was going to divide it by 52 weeks in the year and then 40 hours a week, but I knew I wanted probably 3 weeks vacation. So I divided it by whatever that is to come up with an hourly rate. So let's just say the hourly rate was $50 an hour if you're making around $100,000. So then I knew that was kind of like the very, very base. That wasn't going to give me what I needed, because I had to pay taxes. I needed to buy benefits. I needed to buy benefits not only for me, but for my husband and my daughter. And so I would take that number and multiply it by 2, and then multiply it by 3. And that's your range. So somewhere between 100 and 150 was kind of what I was looking at. I think imposter syndrome is such a thing. It's still a thing for me. I feel very lucky to be in this role, but when people are telling you you're really good at something, sometimes you can't hear it. You can't really believe it. And I've had
sometimes when people are really good, they take it for granted because they're really good at it, and we assume that other people are good at it when they may not be. At least I could speak for myself, right? So it comes easy. So it's like, there's that factor.
I think that's absolutely right. I've experienced that multiple times now, where I've come in and I've tried to train someone on what we do. Really smart people. And it's just amazing how much harder it is than I thought for people to kind of pick it up.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gives you the range. I think I started on that kind of lower range, multiplying.
They were getting you for a steal, it sounds like.
They were getting me for a steal in the beginning, for sure. And that's, but that's part of being new, is you take everything and you do it for cheap. That's how it starts out. And then as you get more established, you can start to charge more and also get more refined in terms of what you want to be doing and what you say no to.
Yeah. And so I want to go to culture for a second. I know culture is really important to you. I mentioned, made best places to work in Minneapolis. And I'm wondering, what did you take from the culture at Target? And then we'll kind of talk about what you do at Pivot Strategies.
Oh, I love that question. So the culture at Target that I really liked, there was just this camaraderie, the support for one another. There was this drive for excellence. I feel like I've never been so edited in my life. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because it can.
What do you mean by that? Edited?
I mean, like you write as a communicator, you write a communications plan, you write, articles, you write things, and it just comes back kind of bloody from all the red marks and the black marks from your colleagues. And I'm just to give you an example of this, like when I took the GRE to go to grad school and I took the writing exam, I got a perfect score. So like I was a good writer, and I'd already been in 2 different roles where I had very, very much used my communications background and had my writing like punched up by great leaders that I worked for. So, but still, when I came to Target, I had a lot of editing, and so you just you learn their way. They're very polished at Target, I would say. They're also really mature in terms of process. So I learned for the first time in my career the importance of structure and process and how that really creates efficiency and consistency in deliverables.
Mm. So what did you take with you to Pivot Strategies, and what are some of the things you do from a culture and retention standpoint?
So we have 5 core values. One of them is better as possible. I definitely think that comes from some of that experience of just that polish, that recognition that there is always this ability to raise the bar and do better, especially in internal communications, because the bar is sometimes incredibly low. But I think some of the things some of our values actually came from what I learned at not only Target, but other companies I've worked for in the past where it wasn't a thing. For example, positive mental attitude, just being really positive, bringing the sunshine. Self-care is non-negotiable. That's a huge thing for us because there we are. Self-care.
If someone's watching the video, by the way, if you're just listening to audio, if you're watching the video, you can watch the video as well. We're looking at pivotstrategies.com page, and I have the core values up. So keep going.
Yeah, thank you. So self-care is non-negotiable. It's something I learned, just corporations just weren't doing well. And I think this is something that some do better now than before after COVID, especially, but oftentimes, I hear from people that they're still not doing it well. It's just this focus on self, and that if you put yourself first, if you whether it's working out, getting enough sleep, eating, sitting down and just eating your meal and focusing on that, you really do perform better at work. And so it's just this encouragement and this permission to my team to put yourself first. Sometimes I feel like we have this rhetoric in our heads that you've got to put the company first, always the company first, and like family comes second, and then like self comes last. And we really try to turn that on its head. So I will tell my team, I've started team meetings with a meditation when everyone's kind of frenzied and running late and we need to just like take a moment to breathe. I've told my team stories about, me taking a nap in the middle of the day so that they just feel the permission that they can do that too. Because we all have those moments when we need to do it. Or, I tell them I block my calendars for self-care time. So it's just time for me to, whether it's go for a walk, clear my head, do some yoga, something like that. For me, that's what self-care looks like. But I think by telling those stories, then other people can start to feel the permission to do that. Yesterday, actually, in our leadership team meeting, my personal best was that I had gone to Target in the middle of the day and just felt the freedom and didn't have to worry or care about walking around and picking up a few things in the middle of the day. And that's why I started this company and what I wanted to continue to feel like, not just for me, but for others.
Yeah, I wish I learned that earlier. I'm still practicing it. It's hard for me.
It's a practice. Yeah, right. Yeah. It's kind of like yoga. It's like just because you've done it a bunch doesn't mean that you're going to be good at it today. It depends on the practices and habits you put in place. And then be the change is really, we sell change, right? We work with companies who are going through massive transformations and we help them through it. We inspire their employees as they're going through it so that it's something that they're looking forward to and excited about versus being pulled along and doing begrudgingly. So we also, as a small company, change a lot. So we put people in new roles. We change offices. We just adapt very, very quickly. And that's just part of our culture. And sometimes people come in and they think they want that. And they're like, this is too hard. And that's okay. But that's one of our core values. And then unapologetically hungry. This doesn't really come from any corporate experience. This mostly comes from me feeling for many, many years. I'm ambitious, right? I have been, I think I was just born that way. And I've been told so many times, like, you need to kind of tone it down a little bit, to like do well in a corporate environment. And for the first time in my life, when I started Pivot, I feel like I don't have to tone it down. In fact, people are like, rah, rah, yeah, go. And then I've got teams of people who are here to help me make this happen, make these dreams happen of becoming the #1 internal communications company in the world. So, I want people around me who are excited by that growth, who are always looking for opportunity. And for them, for individuals on the team, it might look like going and getting their master's degree or going to get a certificate or being involved in something that helps them better their skills. But we want people who have and share ambition for growth.
Talk about, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Are there other things you do as a company that you feel really help with the retention? People have been with you for a long time. They like working with you. I think I watched a video from 2 years. You're talking about different incidents that happen in Minnesota and the culture and how that affect the culture. So it's really top of mind for you. What else do you do that's built into maybe on a weekly basis for retention or team building or anything like that?
So we do a variety of things for team building. So we're virtual most of the time. We do have an office in Edina, and we allow anybody to have a membership to the office if they would like to, and they can have a seat in the office if they would like to. So everybody has that opportunity if they want to be in. Not that many people want to be in, most want to work from home. And so that is part of our culture, right? The flexibility and ability to work from wherever it's a part of our culture. But because we've kind of always had that, we've built different things to keep people engaged throughout that, because we don't want our team to come in and be working on a client and then they feel like they're a part of that client's culture and not part of a pivot culture. So that's been one of the challenges that we've had to really work on throughout us growing. A few things that we do. So first of all, we do a lot of team engagement opportunities. And that can look like I lead self-care workshops. That can look like we do team volunteering. We just did one for a women's shelter for Women's History Month. We're going to do a Habitat for Humanity build in a couple of months. So we come together and do things that are hands-on as a team pretty regularly. We just did a unconscious bias training about a month ago. And then we do team meetings where we're doing team building, and we have the overview of the business. We're EOS, so we're totally transparent with our team about what's happening with the company. So we do a lot of touch points. We also make sure that our teams aren't overburdened. So our leaders, like our sub leadership team, doesn't have more than 8 direct reports, and that they're able to then engage and work really closely with their team, because it can be, if these teams get really big and it's just hard to keep those points of connection.
Love it. I love the team volunteering. It's like also just from a gratitude perspective, just thinking, wow, we're lucky where we're at.
Yeah. I think gratitude is actually, it's not in our core values, but it's a really core piece of what I would say is it's important to me. And I think we express it a lot with our team, because we are really lucky to be where we are. And I feel really a lot of gratitude for the team and the clients that have gotten us here. And I share that with the team through, we do, profit sharing and a lot of giving back to the team to show our gratitude to them. We're kind of, I think, known for, we do little gifts and little things for the team to really show that appreciation on a regular basis. And not because it's lip service. It's like, it's really how we feel. So
I love to learn, Stacia, more about what you do as a company. And with a few examples, I was actually checking out your website, which I'll pull up here. Pivot people, if they want to find you, can go to pivotstrategies.com. But when I go to the work section, I see a couple things here. So I'd love to talk through what you do. It says Office 365 Communications Campaign. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So if you think about big companies, our target market is at least 30,000 employees. And then we have companies that are, up to 300,000 employees. We work with large companies, and as they're going through a big change, usually in the IT space, sometimes in the HR space, we come in and help them with that, engaging only their employees. So we only do internal communications for the companies with their employees, to help their employees through and to have them do their jobs differently so that they know what they need to do. So in this instance, I worked with a large medical device company. They had just acquired another very large medical device company. So they became quite large, almost 100,000 people. And the company that hired me, the original company, they were very centralized, right? So all of their IT systems and processes and things that they were using were pretty consistent. As they had acquired smaller companies, they brought them into their system. The company they hired or acquired, however, was very decentralized, meaning they had grown by acquisition, but they hadn't brought each other onto one type of system, or the systems didn't have any consistency. So when they acquired this company, people couldn't communicate with each other. They couldn't work together. They couldn't get on, today would be like Teams versus Zoom, right? And we all know how to use those things, but at the time we didn't, and it was a different kind of world then. This was in 2017. So they called me because they knew they had to make all these changes and get everybody on this new platform. Office 365 was really the heart of it, but there was a lot of other components to it. Windows 10, printing, some security measures that were going to be added in to all the technology that they were using. And some of it was also taking some things away that were not safe or not good for the company, because if someone left, then information would leave with them. And we needed to keep data in a secure place so that the company would keep it and retain it. So there were about 10 different measures that they were trying to do. And again, it's across 100,000 people and it's global. So it's really big. And you're reaching people that don't speak the language and all of that. So, or don't speak English. They brought me in because they couldn't figure out how to get a communication out. Then when they brought me in, they actually had two different communicators and neither one had worked out. And so, of course, when they were talking to me, I was like, well, what happened to the other two bodies before me? Because I'm kind of nervous for that.
You don't want to be another person buried in the backyard.
Right. I'm like, what happened there? And they said, well, they couldn't get a communication out, was the main thing. They couldn't, it just kept stalling. And they had a change management person. This change management person had scoped out kind of all these different categories of people and how they were going to be migrated onto these new systems. So there was already a kind of a plan in terms of the migration. It was just the communication aspect was stalled and kept turning its wheel. And I thought, why isn't this change management person doing it? So anyways, I came in and I learned that they had, in this situation, because of the merger and some of the regulatory stuff, because of the industry, they had basically a layer that you had to go through where all communications that were going to over a certain number of people in the company had to go through approval. And it had to be approved by this group. And the group included like the chief marketing officer, the chief communications officer, the chief legal officer, the CHRO, the chief technology officer. And so I can't remember how many, there was like 8 people on it. And so nobody could get anything through there because every time they tried, it failed, or they were too afraid to bring anything through because they were worried about, the people that were on it were going to be seeing their work directly. So I came in, and once I saw that they had a pretty good plan in place, it just needed a few tweaks. I put together the comprehensive communications plan in terms of how we were going to communicate this out, what first needed to go out. And then I sent it through this group, and they had a couple of questions. They had a couple of, edits and questions that they wanted to ask me about. And so I made those, and then it was fine. And so we got the communication out in 2 weeks of me starting. And it had been months before that they had been trying to get something out and hadn't gone out. So once we got that out, they were like, okay, we found our person that can do this communication stuff and navigate this, global bureaucratic environment. Now we can really rock and roll. So what was initially a 6-month contract ended up becoming a 3-year project. And I ended up bringing a whole team in underneath me. At that time, it was one of those projects where people were like, what is that project? How is that working so well? We had great internal marketing on it. So we, everything on like the digital boards, all over the company, many, many locations. We did a road show with the leadership team to talk about the changes that were coming. I mean, everywhere from Australia to Boston to Colorado. So we really engaged the team in a way that they had never done before with IT. And it kind of became one of these things that other people in the organization said, how are they doing that? How is that working so well? And so I started getting phone calls from Medtronic, even from corporate communications saying, how are you doing this? And can we borrow some of these tips from you? Also, can you come work on this project and that project and this project? So that's really when the company started to take off.
It spreads. There's a lot of moving pieces with this, Stacia. I want to talk about the benefits, right? They have 100,000 people, right? So companies think, well, we can just do this internally. One of our 100,000 people can do this, or 10 or 100. Talk about the benefits of bringing in like an outside firm like yourself, as opposed to this company tried to handle it internally and it didn't really work. So what?
Twice, yeah. Yeah, great question. So first of all, I didn't at the time have an IT background. Now I've worked with IT predominantly for the last 7 years. But I think part of the benefit of not having a lot of knowledge around a specific technology or technologies is you come at it from the end user perspective, right? You come at it from an employee perspective of, well, why does this actually matter? And like, how am I actually doing my job differently? What do I actually need to know? Versus when you're really internal and you kind of get into the jargon, right? There's also, I think, the other advantage I would say is when you have someone come in from the outside who has done this type of big transformation work in the past, just because you have someone internal and they might know, some people, they don't necessarily know the paths and like how to figure out that path quickly. And once you've done it a lot, you can start to figure out, I can pretty much figure out within about 5 days, who are all the people I need to know to go from here to here and get stuff done. And then you go into the relationship building component. So I don't know, the person you hire, the person you have internally, like they might not have executive presence. They might have the ability to figure that out, but not be able to build the trust with the executives. They might be able to build the trust with the executives, but not understand who the right executives are and waste a lot of time spinning their wheels. So I think it's just that kind of right combination of corporate experience and having done similar projects. It doesn't really matter what field it's in. It could be HR, it could be IT, could be supply chain. But that's kind of the secret sauce. And that's why we at Pivot, one of our differentiators is we say we're bred corporate gone agency. So we only hire people who come from that corporate experience and have done similar projects. I think our average tenure right now is about eight years on average that they've been in corporate doing this type of work before they come to us.
Yeah. And I could also see when you mention this, there's also a dynamic when some internal goes to the leadership team. They may hold things back because they're worried about whatever they're worried about. So there's that dynamic as well. So having an outside company I could see is a big advantage of just kind of laying it all out.
You know what? That's a great point. I didn't even think of that, but that is absolutely a great point because if you're reporting into someone who controls like your pay raise and, as you're climbing the ladder, they're the one that's having a lot of say. You don't want to upset them. And when you're a consultant, you can come in and just say, say what you need to say.
When I think about what you do, I love, who are the ideal companies to work with? And like when you talked about this case, I think of big companies that make acquisitions that need to integrate teams and things. I don't know if like a Salesforce or something like that is good. I picture them as always acquiring these companies. Who else is a good fit to work with?
So companies that are somewhere between 30,000 employees or more, even up to 300,000 employees are really our ideal. Ideally, it's a company that they have their own corporate communications teams, but they all have their own, roles, and they have some big project coming up, and they're going to need probably 2 to 3 people to help navigate this project to make sure it's successful. That's really kind of our ideal. So Fortune 500s, we say a lot. Global 1000s would also usually fit in there. But sometimes you have companies on that list that don't have a lot of employees. And frankly, they probably wouldn't need us as much as some of these companies that have a ton of employees.
So let's talk geographic for a second, because you have a lot of probably clients in Minnesota, and I'm close to you in near outside of Chicago. What are some companies in Chicago that you're like, here's some companies, and you're looking at the cool stuff they're doing in Chicago and Minnesota?
Yeah, great question. We do have one big client in Chicago, but we're definitely looking at what else we can be doing there. So ADM, JLL, Kraft, United Airlines, AbbVie, SC Johnson, and I'm sure that there's more, but those are a few that we would definitely think would be a great candidate for the type of work that we do.
So someone like ADM, what is, you know it better than I do, what is some stuff that you would do with them?
So if their CIO or someone reporting into their CIO was going through some, new technology, even if it's merging a bunch of ERPs together into one big one, would be an opportunity for us to come in and really help with that. Let's say they wanted to move to S/4HANA for SAP, for example. That would be a great opportunity for us to come in. They may already have that plan mapped out, the strategy mapped out. Maybe it's with one of the big four consulting companies, or they've done that internally. But it's the implementation side where we really are coming in to help them with the end user experience and helping make sure that their teams can actually do their jobs differently. Another thing could be, we've done work with companies that are in agriculture, med device, healthcare. So another opportunity could be also within HR. Let's say they wanted to roll out a new payroll system or a new culture. That would be another thing that we could be very helpful with.
Pretty much all the big projects that people are rolling out throughout the year, sounds like.
Right.
So I have two last questions, Stacia. First of all, thank you. One question I have is just mentors, right? On this journey, who's been really important, whether it's a colleague or a mentor, that's really been beneficial on this crazy corporate to agency journey?
So I have to throw back to when I left. I was actually a lobbyist and I went into PR, which was a huge jump. But if I hadn't made that jump, this wouldn't be possible. And I had 3 women who just kind of helped me from behind the scenes. They gave me just enough information and they gave me their time. And, it's funny because now upon reflection, I realized these women were probably all like millionaires and they were just giving me their time. But at the time, of course, I didn't realize that. And so it just increases, the gratitude just increases as I learn and realize more in my life. But Karen Hamley, she actually is now just recently retired. So congratulations, Karen. She was most recently at Thrivent. Lynn Casey, and she also is retired. She was at Padilla Spear Beardsley, and she was the woman CEO there here in Minneapolis. And then Kathy Thunheim, who still runs an amazing organization, Thunheim Partners. They do a lot of work in kind of the public policy arena and public affairs. And she's actually one of those women that you just look up to because she's focused on creating a great culture. She's people first, and she's been that long before her time. And then more recently, Jackie Gibney, she is an agency owner who I met in a CEO group, and she's just been a huge mentor of mine. She's one of those advisor/friend, but she actually sold her company recently and is on to a new phase. But all of those women have been very influential.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So the last question, you actually brought this up before we hit record, which is you were talking about Tony Horton. I asked him something weird about him and that he was a street mime. And that's actually how he made money. He'd put his hat on the street and get food and rent money from being a street mime. And on that episode, I actually made him do it. But for you, you have a special skill. I'll have you just briefly talk about that. But what's interesting, a fun fact, is you are first generation college grad and you almost didn't graduate from high school, because you talked about, I got this perfect score, but that wasn't always the case for you. So maybe mention your special skill and then we'll talk about, why you didn't almost graduate from high school.
Okay, that sounds good. So my special skill is not as cool as miming. And I didn't discover it until I had children because, of course, I wouldn't need to. But I'm really good at the claw machines, that you find in restaurants and arcades and things where you get the stuffy or the candy or the ball out of. I'm really good.
You're a kid's hero, though, for that. So that's probably better than miming for kids.
Totally. I
Yeah.
remember one time my husband and I were driving up to a friend's cabin. We didn't have our kids with us. We went into a grocery store, and I can just tell looking at the crane machines if they're going to be easy to do or not, because I'd like have this keen sense now for it. And I put $5 in, and I saw a family behind me that had like 5 kids or 4 kids, I think. I put $5 in, and I pulled out 4 Loveys. And I just turned around and gave each one of these kids. And my husband's like, what the, how did that just happen? So anyways, my kids love that. But there are ones that don't grab, and you have to really avoid those. So, you only put the $1 in and see if it's going to be one of those, and then don't even bother, because you're never going to, but there's a lot.
If they don't grab, what do they do then? If they don't,
and if there's a stuffed animal kind of thing down here,
yeah,
and it goes like this, it doesn't even like remotely grab anything, then don't even bother, because either it's too low, or some of them are like made to then like never grab anything. But it's
a fix. It's terrible.
Yeah, for sure. It's fixed. So there's probably 30% that are like that, but most of them are not. And the trick is, if you look from both the front and then you look from the side, you can really see the angle, and try and grab like the head, like neck area, because then you'll get a little bit of the head, a little bit of the body, and then it really pulls it up.
I love it. Yeah, my girls will love that. I'm always like, don't put money in that. Just going to take it. You're not going to win anything. And they'll just keep feeding money into that thing. So
yeah,
this is the best interview I've ever done for that fun fact for my daughters. So you almost didn't graduate high school.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of a comeback story, but yeah, I had chronic kind of fatigue, and I had mono in high school. So I had missed a lot of school, and I got to the end of graduation, and I was kind of probably a BC student. I was not a straight A student. I mean, I got A's in some classes that I was really into. English was one of them that I consistently did well in, but I just wasn't engaged. And, the thing for me is I hated the schedule. I hated someone telling me where I had to be, when I had to be there. I had this kind of just monotonous routine that I did every single day, and I just found it exhausting. So I missed a lot of school. I was like a classic school skipper. In addition to being sick, I would just skip school just because I didn't like someone telling me where I had to be. I wanted to go be free. And so anyways, my principal of my school at that time, Dave Dahl was his name. I don't want to like throw him under the bus, but hopefully he's not doing this anymore. I've heard from several people that he still does this sometimes. But at Armstrong High School in Plymouth, Minnesota, he was my guidance counselor, because they were short on guidance counselors at that time. And so he was supposed to be my college, guidance person. And as I was talking to him, he said, I came in and said, my mom's always, talked about me going to college. She didn't go. My dad didn't go. But I would really like to go. And I think that would make her really proud. And he was like, you're not college material. Don't even bother. So I walked away from that conversation.
What a fabulous guidance counselor. Way to be motivating. The opposite of your core value.
I know. He actually said it to several friends of mine who actually like ended up dropping out of school.
Listen to him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, for me, when he said that, I was kind of like, well, I'll show him, kind of a thing. But then in addition to that, I had that plus the double whammy of, it turns out when I had mono, I had missed enough classes. I'd still received a good grade, but I had missed enough classes where I couldn't be passed out of one of my math classes from my freshman year. And yet they still put me on. It was like, I can't remember, algebra or something. And they put me onto geometry and then like pre-calc. But yet I hadn't ever passed algebra because of my number of absences. So then they made me go back in my senior year. I had 2 weeks before graduation, and they told me I didn't technically get that credit. I think they just didn't like me, probably because
it's like Billy Madison. They made you do like 3rd grade again.
Well, yeah, they basically had to go back to an alternative school and in 2 weeks pass out of this algebra class, so that I could walk. And they weren't going to let me walk in graduation until I'd done that. So I was like hustling to do it. But yeah, barely graduated. I only applied to one college. It was Hamlin University in Minnesota. And I wrote them a note. I think I had a pretty bad score on, I can't remember what it is, not SATs. ACT, yeah. I didn't have a great score and also didn't have great grades. So I had to make a pitch to them to let me in. And I told them in this letter, like, you're the only school I'm applying to. And if you don't take me, like, I'm not going to college, essentially. And I had toured several colleges, including like the U of M, but there was something about Hamlin when I was on the campus. People looked at me and they said my name, and I could tell there was just a community there. And that ended up being absolutely the case. Once I was in a place that had community, had smaller classes, people that cared. My first year I had a 4.0. So I actually ended up graduating cum laude. So I ended up being a great experience, and I graduated early. So I had the good student in me, but I think there was two things. One is when you're in college, you get to pick your own schedule. And in high school, you're on someone else's schedule. And that really, like, I feel like I needed to be in like a grown-up environment to thrive. And I would actually kind of equate that, Jeremy, to going from corporate to going to consulting. So in corporate, I had to show up at 8, leave at 5, do these core things in order to do well. And I didn't really ever thrive in that environment. And then I went into consulting where I get to build my own schedule, focus on the things that I felt were most important. And then look what happened.
I love it. I almost want to track down the guidance counselor and send this to them. I won't do it, but
feel free. Tell them to stop.
But I mean, I know a lot of people, certain things in their childhood or earlier on really fueled them. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise that it fueled you to be like, I'll show him or whatever it is. But I just want to thank you, Stacia, and everyone should check out pivotstrategies.com, more episodes of the podcast. And thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.